What is the biggest problem facing Battlefield 1? If you saw my recent video titled, "Are we done with Battlefield 1?" then you'll know that I'm a big Battlefield fan, and I really care about this franchise. In that video I went into detail about DLC, seasonality, and player count trends, which is good foundational information for this video. I'd recommend watching it first, and you can do so by clicking the notification on your screen right now. So today, I want to continue that discussion of Battlefield 1. Although it does have a healthy player base, relatively speaking, the overall trend in player counts for Battlefield 1 have been in decline for months now. And now, it's time to look at the nitty-gritty of why people might be feeling that way, and I'm going to do that by looking at Battlefield 1's core game design issue. My number one issue with Battlefield 1 is that the game lacks a unified identity, which translates to frustrating gameplay. Battlefield 1 is a game centered around this theme of historical World War I, and we expect to see gameplay that aligns with that theme. But there's a couple of design issues in this game that really make me scratch my head, and the first one is grenade spam. Explosives are out of control and ruining Battlefield 1. I understand the recent changes to how explosives are now being resupplied, but it just doesn't seem to have an effect on the moment-to-moment grenade spam present in Battlefield 1. Not only is it completely out of context for the time period the game is set in, but it's also mechanically unrealistic and just not fun. If Battlefield 1 prides itself on realism, then it needs to take a hard look at the resupplying of grenades and explosives by the support class and the amount of grenades players start with. It's unthinkable to me that players should have any more than a single grenade in Battlefield 1. But currently, players can resupply their grenades by standing on ammo crates from the support class. This in itself represents several things. It's completely unrealistic to have grenades pop out of thin air. It incentivizes grenade spam by giving players access to fresh explosives, and it encourages mob-style fighting akin to the chaos we saw back in Operation Metro with Battlefield 3. You have to realize that ammo crates attract masses of people, which in turn attracts more support players to throw down more ammo crates, which results in huge groups of players engaging in choke point explosive fiestas in Battlefield 1's levels. This is not the way World War I was fought. Now, I think the reason that explosives are so overly accessible in Battlefield 1 is because DICE had to make them so plentiful and easy to use to deal with the powerful tanks and behemoths present in the game. To compensate for their power, DICE had to add in a lot of tools for us to take them down in an organized fashion, all of which being explosives. That in itself is not an issue. It creates some great asymmetrical gameplay, but another issue arises from this design. AT rockets and anti-tank grenades are just as useful blowing up infantry, and when no tanks are present, guess where those grenades get thrown? Right at infantry, and when you combine them with frag grenades, you have assault players running around with near 8 or so explosive items if you count the AT rockets. And the radii on some of those explosives are so large that during matches, it's pretty easy to get caught between a rock and a hard place, but in this case, a grenade and another grenade. Further compounding the issue, players can always stock up on more explosives from support players after exhausting their grenades, which essentially creates unlimited splody things coming your way as soon as you spawn. And that's where I find myself in Battlefield 1 all the damn time, throwing, dodging, and dying from grenades. Because explosives are so plentiful and replenishable, they have no personal value in Battlefield 1. Grenades should be used tactfully or for a last resort. After all, it's a grenade, not a weapon to use lightly. Currently, every single player is incentivized to lob his grenades and anti-tank grenades in the general direction of anyone they see because they know they'll get more. Once again, this doesn't gel with the historical theme of the game. My recommendation for DICE is to do the most obvious, simple fix known to mankind. Everyone gets one grenade, and that's it. We can then tone down tanks and shift the power of them as needed to accommodate for this power shift in explosives. After all, it's a win-win for everyone in this case. Sniping in Battlefield 1 is probably the easiest it's ever been in the franchise, which is a ridiculous oversight when you realize that rifles during World War I were unbelievably hard to use and extremely inaccurate. But in Battlefield 1, they are incredibly easy to use and have some insane range with the marksman and sniper variants. Sniping someone across the map should never happen in a game centered around this time period. It's ridiculous, frustrating, and draws you out of the experience. This problem extends to the map design in Battlefield 1. Because control points often require lots of squads to sprint across vast, exposed areas of the map, matches can turn into messy, long-range suppression and sniper battles. It enables if I peek my head around this corner, I'll most likely be shot immediately. In turn, people stop pushing objectives, and that's a huge issue with pacing during Battlefield 1 matches. If people are just too scared to get up and move around the maps, because there's just too much random fire in this game, then I think that's a bad thing ultimately for this game. And thanks to the range and ease of use of snipers and, of course, another culprit, automatic weapons, it's all the more problematic. Automatic weapons should have been used a lot more sparingly in Battlefield 1. I'll just say it, the Automatico and some of the new LMGs are bullshit and have no place in this game. I understand, believe me, that DICE needs to take a certain amount of liberties with the weapon design to make the game fun, but I think they went just too far. The promise of World War I makes me think bolt-action rifles after all. But honestly, even the semi-automatic weapons in Battlefield 1 have an accuracy problem. Every weapon in this game seems to have the potential to be as deadly as a laser beam, it seems, and once again that really fights with the idea that World War I weapons were highly inconsistent. All of the weapon designs feed into this larger debate of this video. It simply doesn't make sense for the time period the game is set in. I would consider adding in weapon malfunction if DICE wants to keep automatic weapons in Battlefield 1 and tone down the accuracy of weapons just across the board. A malfunction mechanic would create that much needed drawback that could balance out the insane power trip that some of these automatic guns are on, while making weapons more difficult to use would make the game feel more historically accurate and unique. Now, if you're new to Battlefield 1, it might seem strange to you that you cannot customize your weapons in any meaningful way. Although DICE did a good job making weapons look pretty historically accurate, there's simply not enough gameplay customization to make them feel personal. I have to assume the reason weapons in Battlefield 1 have threadbare customization is because DICE didn't want to mess with authenticity. But there's got to be a better system out there than what we have now, and that's to say nothing of the small weapon pool present in Battlefield 1 either. Now, in terms of character progression, I think Battlefield 1's systems are the worst the series has ever seen by a long shot. Instead of gradual and steady weapon progression, players will have just a few options early to buy weapons for their favorite classes, but then be met by a giant no man's land grind up until level 10 to purchase the final weapon. And because the weapon pool is so small, and all the variants you'll be buying feel very samey, the grind to get weapons feels all the more unfulfilling and confusing. And lastly, there are a few honorable mentions for other issues in Battlefield 1, the biggest of which being the very late DLC schedule for the Season Pass. Honestly, having no DLC for 6 months really burnt me out, and when you combine that with the really bad weapon and character progression, it's no wonder why player count trends in Battlefield 1 are in decline. And finally, I think a lot of us will agree that Battlefield needs to overhaul its user interface within the menus, as currently, it's just a big nightmare with Origin to try to set up squads with your friends. It's not the worst UI ever, but it's definitely not hassle-free. Battlefield 1 is a game that doesn't need to be so contemporary, but feels that way in design and gameplay. I honestly want a more personal, slower game in Battlefield 1. After all, the perception of what we expect from DICE and the theme of Battlefield 1 doesn't exactly match up to what the game offers. It doesn't matter if World War I was like this or not, it's the fact that people's perception of what World War I was, that's what matters in the end. And I know a lot of us perceive World War I themes in video games to be much different than Battlefield 1. It's just a fast-paced shooter with a World War I paint job. That's it. There's really nothing in this game that really embraces, in a gameplay sense, the old-school mentality of trench warfare. It just feels like DICE went too far to modernize this game for mass appeal. I want the promise of what World War I means in a video game, and I do not get that with Battlefield 1. But at the end of the rainbow, Battlefield 1 is still a fun game. It's hard to deny that. When you can avoid the snipers and the grenade spam and forgive the really strange customization systems in this game, it's still a good Battlefield game, just like every Battlefield game is. But is it the best Battlefield game that we all expected? I would say no, definitely not. But what do you guys think of Battlefield 1? Did you expect something different, or would you like to comment on this notion of gameplay versus thematics? Let me know down below. And thanks for watching, guys. If you enjoyed the video, by all means hit the thumbs up button and subscribe here for more of our future content, and have yourself a kick-ass day.